All right, with some technical difficulties, we're finally going to be debating if 9/11 was quote unquote likely an inside job. Now, by quote unquote inside job, for the sake of context, I'm not arguing who's doing it. I'm arguing that from what we know about 9/11 isn't the official story. But first, let me introduce Citizen Tom.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom. As has been alluded to, the actual prompt is somewhat vague, and on that recognition, I am going to let logical reason define what he believes by inside job, inside what, inside where, inside by whom, and I will take the skeptic's point of view from there.
Okay, so I actually had a conversation with Yaz last week about this question, and what I'd like to direct the question or the topic from who did it, but based on what happened. Inside job, we're going to say from what we know in 9/11, few things happened. We know that some people hijacked some planes, flew them into towers 1 and 2 in New York City. And then somebody hijacked a plane, flew it into the Pentagon, and then a fourth plane where it crashed over crashed over Pennsylvania around the same time period. Now, what I'm going to be arguing is that I'm not disputing any of those facts. What I'm disputing is the fact that we still don't have an explanation for what happened to Building 7. And the official explanation is there is none. Tom?
I'd like you to go ahead and advance your pro point, because there is, we've got now nearly 16 years worth of different conspiracy theories going back and forth about 9/11 truth. So I'd appreciate if you could narrow us down, and I'll provide the skeptic's point from there.
Fair enough. So I'm arguing that the official explanation from what we know from World Trade Center 7, by the way, there are 3 towers that collapsed on 9/11. The 2 that got hit by planes, and a third tower. The third tower is called World Trade Center 7. It collapsed in under 10 seconds from, it was a 72-story building, if I'm not mistaken. It collapsed in under 10 seconds. And the official explanation from NIST was that it collapsed due to fires. Now, we've never had a steel frame building collapse in fires prior to that, and we've never had a steel frame building collapse to fires after the fact. Now, this building wasn't a raging inferno. It collapsed all at once. So I'm not arguing that I know exactly what happened, but I'm arguing that fires did not cause that collapse. Fair enough?
All right, well then, something else we're going to need to attack in this debate then, because it's 9/11 was most likely an inside job. So the prompt has nothing to do with, well, it has to do with causation, the what happened, but inside job points to a whom, and furthermore, what is the relevance of how the building collapsed versus who did it, what the motivation was, why it occurred. So a lot of, and I'll go ahead and tackle my opening here, because the 9/11 conspiracy movement is a pretty thorough microcosm of what conspiracy movements look like in their methods. And we've already seen some of the trademarks here, which is there is an official explanation. One leg of it is, of course, the 9/11 Commission report, a rather thick document, which I read not long after it came out. We've also had the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, as you referred to the acronym, has come out with official explanations for the science behind it. And then we have a smattering of groups that in one way or another have criticized the official story. However, there has been no cohesive or coherent alternate explanation offered, nor has there been any science of anywhere near comparable value conducted regarding any of the 9/11 conspiracies. It compares to the wealth of actual information that we have from NIST and from the 9/11 Commission and all of the sources that they used. Second, in addition to just the fact that all we've got here is raw skepticism, we have the open question of if the official explanation doesn't fit, why doesn't it fit? What does fit? And what relevance does it have to the world that we live in post 9/11? You know, the official explanation, of course, is never going to be thorough when you have buildings that are no longer there. We are, by definition, piecing together a tragedy and a massive disaster that happened, and we're doing it after the fact, and we're doing it with bits of buildings and bodies that are in micro form. So we're taking small bits of information that people have put a lot of effort into piecing together into something cohesive, and then saying, yeah, but there's small bits of information and it took you a lot of time to put it in together something cohesive. So what is the significance of how Building 7 was destroyed versus how the official explanation says it was destroyed, and how does that make it an inside job, and what is the relevance of it being a quote-unquote inside job versus the explanation we're used to, where it was Saudi nationals hijacking planes that resulted in a massive collapse of multiple buildings?
Okay. Now, just to be clear, I'm not disputing that. I think it's pretty clear that the planes were hijacked. They flew into buildings. The reason that World Trade Center 7 is of significance is because NIST or NIST, their official explanation, they admit, is their best guess for what happened, and they say that the likelihood that that their best guess caused the collapse is very unlikely in their own conclusion on their report. Now, I'd say that this is related to a quote-unquote inside job, because the only outside organization to kind of do research into this is an organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which specifically address Building 7 and the collapse that ensued. They theorized that there were some sort of explosive devices that were set there prior to any planes hitting any buildings. Now, this is the reason that this is again related to an inside job is, now, if there were in charges inside of buildings before all these other events happened throughout the day, before planes were hijacked, flown into buildings, before towers 1 and 2 collapsed, before the Pentagon was hit, and before this plane over Philadelphia crashed, the reason that it's more likely an inside job is that there were charges already set within the building on Building 7, which seems to have been, how can you say, completely non-related, completely beside the point for all the things that everyone saw and remembers. Nobody remembers World Trade Center 7.
Well, you say no one remembers World Trade Center 7, but just a couple of months ago, Popular Mechanics actually tackled this exact issue. If you'll give me a moment, I'm having to turn off my ad blocker so I can get to the article that I read on this a few days ago. So the organization that you're talking about, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, first of all, consisted of 1, architects who are not structural engineers, and 2, a series of engineers, not one of whom was an accredited civil engineer. 3, nothing that they have produced has ever been published in a peer-reviewed journal, except for 1 report that slipped by that I've been able to find, and the editor of that journal resigned because she was so ashamed that it slipped by her and she never actually read it. So it was a 47-story structure, and the claim that has been made was that the U.S. government orchestrated or abetted the attacks because there were explosives involved. Your general claim seems to be that any evidence of explosives points to some cause outside of the 9/11 hijackers themselves. First thing that I would say is, even though we don't have any evidence that, even though the evidence is scant, of course, that there were explosives planted in the building themselves, you yourself characterized it as a theory. That doesn't rule out terrorism. It might just mean we missed some terrorists. So even if there's an alternate cause for how they destroyed Building 7, that doesn't make it likely that it was an inside job. It just might mean the terrorists had more means than we know of. And in fact, we've discovered over the years that the 9/11 terrorists had more and more resources. And of course, we've dug into other levels of government and massive financial backers attached specifically to the Saudi royal family. But when people say inside job, they're usually talking about the U.S. government. There have been claims, and I've seen some of them that have to do with unexploded thermite being found in the building remains. You correctly characterize these as theories because the people in architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth were not allowed to examine the same level of forensic evidence that the 9/11 Commission was allowed to, that NIST was allowed to, and even NIST admits the evidence it had available to them because, of course, we're dealing with a building that's no longer there was scant. So all of this suggests that we're dealing with rampant speculation from a group that basically their claim to fame was just calling attention to potential holes in the official story, not coming up with a reviewable or well-supported story of their own. And that's not enough to support the claim that 9/11 was an inside job, let alone that the official story was even incorrect.
Okay, so once again, when I say inside job, I'm very open to the possibility that Osama bin Laden was the perpetrator that they claim that did it, was also behind this. I don't make a claim to who. I make a claim that there seems to be a cover-up to the explanation within Building 7. Building 7 has three distinct things that we know about it. The official report that NIST put out says that the most likely explanation for what happened has a very low probability of occurring. Second, architects and engineers for 9/11, as you pointed out, are a group of accredited engineers that say, okay, well, we hypothesize by the fact that fires have never taken down a building, and fires have never taken down a steel frame building since, that it's more likely that something else happened than fires taking down the building. So, and lastly, we can conclude that if something other than fires took down the buildings, and yet the 9/11 Commission report and NIST hasn't explored any other options, we can say that there's some form of a quote-unquote inside job in the form of a cover-up that occurred. Now, whether they allowed it to happen or they planned it, that's not for me to say. But what I can say for relative certainty is that buildings that fall at free fall speed don't collapse due to fire. Let me go to your second point, which was on the nanothermite. And I did point out that it was a theory, but molten metal was discovered in the rubble of the building. And there's pictures that point this out where steel frames at the bottom of the buildings were cut at 45-degree angles. Things that basically, when you have supports that are cut at 45-degree angles, according to architects and engineers from 9/11, that is consistent with some sort of detonation device. They hypothesize nanothermite, but without access to those materials, how can you do it? What doesn't do it is fires, and that's what I'm arguing against. It's very unlikely that fires cause 45-degree cuts in the steel supports of the buildings.
Okay, we've got two different things going on here. The first thing I'll say about these 45-degree cuts in the steel frame of the buildings, as you have admitted yourself, the building was destroyed. There's not necessarily any way for people who don't have direct access to the forensic evidence to tell whether or how any of these beams were originally cut. However, I have provided a link in the comments, which is just one study out of many that I found that took a survey of 22 total cases from 1970 to 2002 of structural collapses due to fires. 6 of those buildings were made of structural steel. So your claim that there's never been a building before or after that had structural steel guts destroyed by fire appears to be incorrect just on this one study I've been able to find in the short time that we've been discussing here. Second, you'll see from the Popular Mechanics article that I've posted, there was a follow-up to the Popular Mechanics book, Debunking 9/11 Myths, Why Conspiracy Theories Can't Stand Up to the Fire. That in the case of Building 7, you had 7 hours of uncontrolled fires. So you're not talking about a single blaze, just a normal blaze in the building. You're talking about something that was fueled by a massive collapse of buildings around Building 7 that burned out of control for several hours with fire crews unable to contain it. Then there was a steel girder on floor 13 that lost its connection to one of the columns supporting the building. And that's what caused floor 13 to collapse. So the official explanation has identified a specific girder that collapsed and that caused a cascade collapse from floor 13 to floor 5, Column 79 no longer supported by a girder, buckled, triggering a rapid succession of structural failures that moved from east to west. All 23 central columns follow the exterior columns, failed in what's known as a progressive collapse. Total damage, it spreads from one structural element to another. So it's taken some time, and it's taken a series of beatings to the official story, but the story has been refined about Building 7, and now Popular Mechanics, as of August of this year, has put out an article that narrows down what we're talking about here. Now, you've used the phrase cover-up. I'm going to ask you to expound on that. Who do you think is covering it up? What are they covering up? What evidence do these people with this Gnostic knowledge have that they've kept from the 9/11 Commission and from NIST? And why are they covering it up? When we talk about inside job, we are implying that there is an inside motive. What are you alleging is the motive? What would someone get out of this, and who?
Okay, well, one thing at a time. Let's go back to the study, the lateral study that you have for 6 buildings that collapsed, and you said 3 of them were made of steel. I believe it was 3. Looking at the study right now, none of them actually underwent a complete collapse. None of them underwent a collapse that was at free fall speed. Third, none of the collapses that were observed occurred simultaneously with in the support structure. They would collapse from a side window inward. We can observe raging infernos such as the London Tower fire from this past year to actually see what happens when a building has a steel frame is engulfed in flames. Although that it collapses, the core column it remains. And all the examples that you gave, the core columns were still standing after the collapse of the building. However, Building 7 is an exception. The core columns were cut right at the base. Second, we wanted to go back towards the question of, well, you wanted me to expound upon what do I mean by cover up? Well, I don't claim to know that. What I'm arguing for, again, is by inside job, I just mean that there are people that have information that have covered it up. Now, the people that are privy to that information are up to you to decide. Well, what we do know is that NIST didn't have the information. Architects and engineers don't have the information. And the people that request the information for 9/11 for a Freedom of Information request have been denied access to the firsthand evidence. And since then, most of the evidence that was kept after the fact was held at Hangar 7, which was basically an old airport hangar. That was destroyed in 2011. Also, the remaining evidence has been completely destroyed. So what I'm saying by a cover-up is that the evidence has been withheld from people to be able to draw a reasonable conclusion from it. So the most likely impact is that somebody had planted some sort of explosive devices in World Trade Center 7. For what reason, I don't know. For what reason that they wanted to go through with it, I'm completely unaware why. There's millions of people that could, and I mean this literally, there's millions of possible suspects. However, the people that had motivation are probably within a mix of foreign governments, domestic governments, and terrorists. The explanations that everyone expunges upon. The problem what I have with the term inside job is that it's mixed up with people like Alex Jones. I'm not claiming I know who did it. I'm claiming that the official explanation is insufficient to be able to explain the collapse of Building 7. And without...
Okay, I could still hear your microphone there. Well, you very graciously offered that it's up to the individual listener, reader, studier to decide who had the motivation to conduct 9/11, who had the motivation to reveal or not reveal information, who benefited, who didn't benefit from the way the information was disseminated or from the act itself. I and many others, in fact, the vast majority of people, including all peer-reviewed scientific studies on the subject, including, of course, the United States government, the United States military, all of the major world powers around the world, even ones who are our enemies, now accept the official what you call the official version, because it's the best supported version, contained in the 9/11 report and in the follow-up reports by NIST. And that is that Building 7 collapsed as a result of a raging fire that burned for many hours, that caused a cascade collapse of the entire building. That the people who perpetrated the acts that actually caused the collapse were 20 plus, mostly Saudi nationals, terrorists who were part of the Al-Qaeda organization working under the direction of Osama bin Laden, whose motivation was to cause significant financial, moral, and world-standing harm to the United States. Of course, we can argue about how successful that was and what other people have done after the fact to take advantage for other agendas. But that's the firmest grasp we have on who did it. It's the firmest grasp we did on how it happened. And we certainly know what the impact was. And this is, again, typical of conspiracy theories where, first of all, it's just a matter of poking holes in the quote-unquote official story to raise questions for the sake of question-seeking. And second, it's reliant upon the supposed existence of some secret knowledge held by some shadowy individual that is left up to the listener to decide who it is, or to fill in the blanks to some boogeyman who exists. I'll give you credit that you have not ascribed a specific boogeyman. You're simply at the point of saying there is secret knowledge and saying someone holds it, and you're leaving it open-ended. Unfortunately, that is the root of conspiracy theories, and it's the root of a tree that does not stand very well on its own, especially when there is a significant amount of evidence considering how much was destroyed at the scene. So out of the millions of possible suspects, you've declined to narrow it down. You've declined to assign motivation. All we're left with is blind speculation and a blind negative, and that's not enough to support the proposition that underlies this debate. Okay, unfortunately, your last bit of video and audio I haven't been able to hear any of. So rather than try to address any of it, and hopefully the rest of my argument will speak for itself since I wasn't able to hear it. No need to retread it. I want to finish my argument by talking about motivation. And I want to ask the motivation of the people, specifically people like architects and engineers for 9/11 truth and other conspiracy theorists for advancing these theories, questioning the official story of 9/11. When you look to their motivation, in fact, when you go to the websites for these groups, they're selling books, they're selling videos, they're asking you to go to affiliate links. They are pushing other research and materials that have been authored by the same people. Some of the people who were on the forefront of 9/11 conspiracies lost their jobs at universities and have lived off of these conspiracy theories. In fact, you said that the architect and engineers for 9/11 Truth's Freedom of Information requests were denied. Actually, those requests were granted, and those blueprints are a large part of their website now, and they're a part of what they use to draw a profit from advertising potential. The people who released the official versions of the story, as far as we can tell, their agenda may have involved intervention in the Middle East, but it was intervention they believed was justified by the official story. Other than that, the motivations that they have appear to have been to do their jobs as directed by the government. The skeptics, on the other hand, their motivation appears to be to sell books, to keep their names in the limelight, to sell advertisements, and other means that are not conducive to truth, which is why they stop at the threshold of just saying the official story doesn't work. However, the proposition of this debate was 9/11 was most likely an inside job. We haven't seen enough evidence here that there was any motivation for any insiders to conduct it. We have only seen the bare question of, was the official story good enough? And that is not enough to advance the proposition offered. Thank you.